Okay, everyone. Hi, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. If everyone else would love to join me, that'd be great. I'm going to go ahead and give us welcome and a context for this opening celebration. So hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. I know I've said that numerous hundreds of times, but thank you for coming to this hybrid book launch and the celebration of Surviving the Long Wars, Creative Rebellion at the Ends of Empire. This book marks the accumulation of a multi-year community-driven project that explores how art, storytelling, and collective resistance challenge the legacies of U.S. empire and militarism. Through the voices of artists, veterans, and scholars, Surviving the Long Wars reimagines pathways towards justice, healing, and abolition. And we are all thrilled, all of us as co-editors are really thrilled to be able to be here with you today to honor the work that we've done with each other and through the help of all of you, to reflect on this book's impact as well as the 2023 triennial's impact. So thank you for being here. I am currently based in Claremont, California, which is the traditional homelands of the Tongva Gabrielino people. And I want to acknowledge that the land that we're on honors those history and legacies of those indigenous groups of people who continue to steward this land. I also want to give a special thank you to the Benton Museum of Art, where this webinar is currently being hosted, which is at Pomona College, as well as the Gender and Women's Studies program at the University of Illinois, Chicago, the DeMille Art Fund, Bridge Books, and the Emerging Veteran Art Movement, as well as the Pomona Art History Department at Pomona College. A few more thank yous are special thanks to Anthony Torres and Joseph Lefthand, who cannot join us today. We hold them in our hearts and are very glad and honored to have been able to work with them. We also want to recognize Becky Nasadowski, who was our designer, Kevin Basil for our copywriter, Zainab Halal and Rachel Dukes for their contributions as well. And now I'm going to slow down a little bit to give you all some of the housekeeping not rules, but just kind of context. So just so you know that, yes, this meeting or event, I should say, is being recorded. So once we edit it a little bit and provide some of the engagement about how to buy the book afterwards, we will make this available to you all. Please use the Q&A function, which is on the bottom bar of your presentation of the Zoom, to submit questions for us if you have any, not the chat, because we don't want to miss out on your questions. So again, please use the Q&A to send us questions. In the chat, please feel free to share where you're coming from and to connect with others throughout the collection or the moment of the event. And we will be providing follow-up details, including links and resources after the event as well. And one more thing, if you go to the bottom end of your screen, you will see the show captions link that you can use to upload or to use captioning, since we don't have that provided right now for today. And one more thing, make sure that when you are sending chats, that it's to everyone. If you're meaning to send it out to everyone, I know sometimes we forget that we're not sending to just one or two people. Okay. So I am going to go and kind of give our overall framing. And I'm going to slow down a little bit because I've been trying to rush through it, I feel like. But basically, this event is years in the making. It's over 3 years of collaborative work that between all of us from different places, from different spaces, to celebrate this book launch almost 6 months after its initial release. Today, we want to explore the process, collaboration, and the behind-the-scenes stories that brought Surviving the Long Wars to life. We also may have time to reflect on the Veteran Art Summit in March 2023, which brought together community members, artists, and veterans for 4 days of programming focused on solidarity, community care, and creative rebellion. And I want to take some time to introduce you really quickly to each of our panelists today. I'm going to start with Dr. Ronak Kapadia, who is the Associate Professor and Director of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Dr. Therese Quinn, who is the Professor and Director of Museum and Exhibition Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Me, I'm Dr. Meranda Roberts, Visiting Professor in Art History at Pomona College. Aaron Hughes, who is the Surviving the Long Wars co-curator, independent artist, and Iraq War veteran, as well as Amber Zora, who is the DeMille Art Fund program manager and as well as a veteran. Whew, okay, let me take a little breath. Okay. Now that you've met our panelists, I want to take some time to hear directly from them about their journey of surviving the long wars. This first segment is called The Making of the Project, and it will give us insight into how each of our panelists became involved, their roles in this multi-year collaboration, and how their experiences shaped the project as a whole. I'll now invite each panelist to introduce themselves, share a bit about their work, and reflect on their part in this important undertaking. And I am going to begin this by introducing you to Aaron Hughes. Aaron?
Hey, thanks, Meranda, and thanks everyone for joining us. Aaron Hughes, he, him. As mentioned, I'm an artist, a curator, and an Iraq War veteran, anti-war veteran. And I've come to this project through a long journey. I would say stemming out of my initial deployment, being a part of an illegal occupation, kind of left me in a moral crisis, to say the least. And I kind of lost all my bearings. But the one thing I felt like I could still hold on to was that creativity wasn't destructive. And so I thought I wanted to be an artist and get involved with art and how art could counter destruction. And when I got home from my deployment, I changed everything I was involved with and got involved with studying art. And that led me to getting involved with art and activism, which took me to being involved with Iraq Veterans Against the War. And through that community, I started to meet all these other anti-war veteran artists. Um, and there was so many of us doing beautiful, powerful work. A bunch of organizations got formed and projects got formed. Combat Paper, Warrior Writers, the Veteran Art Project. And I feel like the Dirty Canteen, the list kind of goes on. Um, and I felt like it was important that we started working together and started trying to find a way to connect all the different projects. And that's kind of where a bunch of us started working on trying to create a network of veteran artists across the country called the Veteran Art Movement. And our first gathering in 2014, we decided we needed to find a way to bring everybody together. And the triannual became the tool to do that. And so in 2019, we worked on the first triannual, War and Survival. And through that, I got to know Ronak and Ronak Kapadia and his amazing work on insurgent aesthetics. And I was already familiar with some of the artists he wrote about in that book. Wafa Bilal, who was a part of the first triennial, but his analysis, his critique was something I feel like we needed. I feel like we weren't pushing the conversation enough. We weren't pushing ourselves, and there's so much ways that there's kind of this paternalistic attitude about many marginalized communities, but veterans, it's like, oh, look, it's a veteran making art, and there's not a lot of critical discourse. And Ronak really supported that, and we started talking shortly after that first triennial about the next one. And Therese helped make the first triennial happen by hosting us at the University of Illinois Museum and Exhibition Studies program, and helped connect me to Ronak, and then also introduced us to Meranda, and that the intellectual insights and visions of Ronak and Meranda really helped form the vision for surviving the long wars, and led us on this multi-journey year process of curating and organizing this multifaceted exhibition humanities project. So kind of that's the trajectory that landed me here.
Thank you. Amber?
Sorry, I lost my audio button for a second. It's an honor to be speaking alongside such brilliant folks and to celebrate the launch of the book. My name is Amber Zora. I'm an artist and anti-war veteran. I live in Rapid City, South Dakota on the unceded Lakota territory. I'm a woman with long brown hair and I'm wearing a black shirt and behind me is a white wall with a floral landscape. I became involved in this triennial because I was a veteran curator in the first triennial that Erin was just talking about. For this triennial, I helped with curation, logistics, and one-on-one with the artists, speaking to the artists, and I wrote an essay for the book. I also work for the nonprofit D-Mill Art Fund, and through that role, I support artists that challenge militarism. I find myself today as a veteran artist and organizer because Erin Hughes keeps emailing me to be a part of these projects. I'm just kidding. I'm a part of this project because this community means a lot to me. And when the world doesn't make much sense, I know that I have these people that do. And I think that I'm a better listener than speaker. I went to photography school, thinking I was going to spend most of my time in the darkroom or a photo lab. But I was also searching for other veterans in my generation who were a part of, who were questioning their involvement in these never-ending wars. And I was drawn to this work because there are people I went to high school with that are no longer with us or unable to speak because of the wounds from the system. And so I'm here to speak in this space to help speak for them. And thank you for being here, and I'll pass it to Miranda.
Hi, everyone. Okay, sorry, my screen keeps going back and forth. Really quickly, I want to be very upfront. The 2020 through 2022 were not, I mean, they weren't good years for anybody, but my memory from that time period is very sketchy, to say the least. But I do remember at the time I was living in Chicago, working at the Field Museum of Natural History, working on the exhibition hall, the Native American exhibition hall that hadn't been updated in 75 years. And through conversations and through just other people, I was able to meet Erin as well as Therese and kind of start these talks about what does it mean to actually decolonize museums or exhibitions, if that type of work is even possible. I also am very critical of institutions about the way that they use the word decolonization as a sort of like bait and switch to get people to feel like they are on a road towards healing and justice, when in reality, it's a reproduction of a lot of the same harm that these systems were built on. And then most importantly, I'm a Native woman. I'm a Northern Paiute and Chicana woman who grew up in Southern California as well as Nevada. And I grew up in not the best of conditions. My family has a lot of generational trauma, and as well as I do. And I have noticed how it's not just the wars that get fought in different countries through militarism, it's the wars that get pushed on to marginalized groups of people through different efforts to keep us poor, right? To keep us from being able to be successful in the systems that authorities say that they want us to be successful in. And I'm bitter, honestly, about how my family has been treated as Native people and how just Native people in general, and especially Native veterans, are very misunderstood as well. We get this talk a lot about why are Native people, in the armed services. And people tend to forget that this was our land as well, or is our land. And so there is a need to fight for it, but those reasonings are so varied, right? And I don't think, for me, I didn't want this collaboration to be a be all end all. I wanted people to start having conversations where it felt sticky. Like a lot of people don't want to talk about the Iraq war in regard to what it means to live in today's society or to talk about Native people in those regards. And I was like, we should though. Like, why aren't we doing those things? So I found the ability to kind of have a voice in those types of topics, as well as like feel like I can find a community amongst my co-editors, because I do feel like I'm isolated some of the time, and it feels good to be able to have something to look forward to where I feel seen and heard and appreciated by comrades. So thank you. And I am going to pass it, I believe it's to Ronak.
That's me. Thank you, Miranda. Greetings, everyone. I'm Ronak Kapadia. I'll offer a visual description as well. I'm a light-skinned brown person with a short beard and clear glasses. I'm wearing a royal blue shirt with white paisley flowers, and behind me is a stacks of books on a red bookshelf with a portrait of Angela Davis on my left shoulder and Billie Eilish and Frank Ocean. You probably can't see that because the sun is blocking that. And on the right is this beautiful fuchsia print that my friend and colleague, Aaron Hughes, him, offered me that says queer as in free Palestine. And it's really beautiful. And I'm really happy to add that to my collection of art making prints from friends and colleagues. As Meranda mentioned, I teach at UIC. I'm the director of grad studies, actually, at gender and women's studies. And I see a lot of our colleagues and students who are here, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. And I'm a queer feminist cultural studies scholar of race, war, and empire in the US. And I study how artists, especially artists from the South and Southwest Asian diasporas, contend with contemporary US militarism and how they do that through their art making and creative practices. And so Aaron already kind of alluded to the friendship that we built starting around 2019 with the first triennial. I was fortunate enough to sit in a Muse class and offer a short lecture based on my first book as it was just coming out, Insurgent Aesthetics. But actually met Aaron many years before in 2014 at the Rutgers Marking Time Conference, Nicole Fleetwood's project before Nicole published her book and created the MoMA PS1 art exhibition. She first had this amazing conference of all these abolitionists and organizers and artists at Rutgers in 2014. And that's where I learned about Aaron and the work that you were doing. And I was like, oh, I'm going to keep my eye on that guy. That's really interesting. And, over the decade now, since then, I've been really excited to see all the ways that Aaron is a kind of connector and creates glue between different kinds of people who are doing really radical, interesting, creative work. I could not say no when he asked if I'd be involved in this project way back in 2021. I was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the era of vaccinations, early vaccinations, where we've said, yeah, let's talk about this and get serious about organizing and thinking about this second triennial, which felt like a really distant, far away thing at that time. And it's like, okay, I'll say yes to a couple Zoom meetings. And then lo and behold, 4 years later, here we are. We've been meeting almost weekly, it seems, for this 4-year period. And it's really been revolutionary. It's transformed so much about my own intellectual and political projects, my own relationship to my writing practice and curatorial practice. And it's making me think really differently about the kinds of collaborations I want to have in the future. And so I'm really grateful that we dug deep and worked on this book and decided to produce a book, even though the book came out a year and a half after the triennial. It really is the archive, not only of the triennial and everything that went into it, but a kind of model and template, I think, for the kind of work, interesting, interdisciplinary, public-facing, humanities-oriented work that is not always well regarded or well supported or well financed, but is truly revolutionary. And so I'm really excited to be part of this group and excited for our discussion. So I'll pass things off to Therese.
Hi, everybody. I'm Therese Quinn, and I, like all the other people in this Zoom room here, just so delighted to work with all of these colleagues, people I knew from a long time back. That includes Aaron. I think I met Aaron first through his artwork, which I saw posted all over the streets of Chicago at various points. And then I think I probably met you on the streets as well, Aaron, at various protests. And I've just been so happy to have a chance to work with everybody. So I want to take a step back, though, and say my pronouns, she, they. I'm an older white woman with short brown hair and green framed glasses. I'm wearing a purple shirt. And I'm, as other people here, a person who teaches at the University of Illinois, Chicago, which is the public research university in the city of Chicago. And I direct the Museum and Exhibition Studies program there, which is a museum studies program that's focused on social justice. Before I did this work, I worked in museums for a long time, and I also worked in teacher education, specifically art teacher education for a long time. And so I first approached this project through, I think, the lenses of an activist. I am an anarchist, anti-authoritarian, queer person as well. I mean, the furthest to the left I can describe myself, that's where I'm at these days, like many other people, I think. Yeah, it just keeps getting further to the left. But it makes a perfect framework for the work that I want to do in museums, which is similar to the work that I wanted to do in public education. I see these all as important sites of arts, culture, important knowledge, potentially. And they're also spaces that aren't always fully there and can always be made better through the struggles of the people working in them often, and by people on the street who are pushing those institutions to do a better job of giving us the things that we, the public using these spaces and also funding these spaces, deserve. So as Meranda said, there are a lot of problems with museums, and they frame information in often quite terrible and misleading ways. But once in a while, they do some pretty great things through our efforts at pushing them. And so when I first heard about this project through Aaron, I was really excited for a number of reasons. One, that we could raise some money together potentially that would fund some of the students in our program. And it would also offer our students a chance to actually think about social justice in cultural institution settings and what that might look like, what that work could be. And it was just such a fantastic opportunity for them, for me, and hopefully for all of us working together. That was the first project. And when the second project came around, of course, I couldn't say no. I wanted to be involved and see how that project would change, the Surviving the Long Wars project. I'm also so glad that we were able to produce this book together and see it go out into the world and continue the discussion, really. I think we just have to keep talking about it. It's big and important work, and we will. So I'm going to pass it back now to Meranda.
Thank you, everyone. Well, thank you all for sharing such powerful reflections. Hearing about your individual journeys and understanding the depth of your collaboration, it really helps to set the stage for this moderated conversation that we're about to have. So I want to move into a deeper conversation about the broader themes of the book, exploring art as a vessel for rebellion, challenging the dominant narratives of empire, and imagining pathways forward. And so I think that we're going to be breaking this down into like maybe 5 key themes, starting with the question, why art, why now? But before I go into that, I want to set up the question a little bit, which is art has always been, it's a repeat of what I just said, but art has always been a vessel for rebellion, survival, and resistance, especially for those impacted by war and empire. So for Surviving the Long Wars, veteran and survivor art is at the core of this resistance. So let's explore what that is, what inspired this project, and how it has evolved over time. Aaron, would you like to begin this question or answer this question?
Yeah, and I wanted to start by just I skipped over my visual description. So I'm a white tall male with a reddish beard and brown blonde hair. I'm in front of a wooden kind of fireplace structure in my living room in Chicago, home of the three fires. I'm just hearing everyone's reflections to get us started. So many memories and thoughts were coming up, and I just wanted to lift up Therese. And when we applied to this NEH grant, National Endowment for the Humanities, Dialogues on the Experience of War grant, and in 2018, and when we were awarded it and went to DC, we kind of thought it was a coup. We had these two, I think, very critically minded, anti-war, anti-authoritarian kind of individuals leading this Dialogues on the Experience of War grant. And I really appreciated the space that we had within that dialogues convening, where they brought all the grantees together in DC to kind of ask these really critical questions to the broader community, all the other grantees that I think, they might acknowledge some of these contradictions, but weren't really diving into them. And I feel like that's kind of why, for me, art is so essential. For me, the norms of our militarized society is violent and traumatizing. And when one begins to see this violence, understand it profoundly, know it in your body, this abnormal, irrational, immoral um, norm of our lives is traumatizing. It's alienating. It's isolating. And art, the creative process itself, can literally take that violence, the ephemera of that harm, and transform it into protest, into meaning, into resistance and survival. It is this transformational process that is so inspiring, and why I want to create, why that's why I wanted to create art in the first place. And it's how I imagine art can work radically to reorientate us all towards solidarity. You know, if we can transform these tools of violence into and tools of trauma really into expressions of meaning, belonging, resistance. There's so much opportunity to build relationships and solidarity across communities that have been harmed. And so for me, art transforms the void of trauma into meaning. And I think, you know, for me, like artists, working with all the layers through the triennial, you know, like Rodney Ewing and his work is all his print, all the layers within his print. Ruth Kinnico, the way she layered in these historic documents with her own military uniforms. You know, Maoist Chisti taking these forms of violence, these drones, and transforming them with truck art. You know, Monty Little's literally layering of materials. Yvette Pino's layering of stories. I just think about how all of these examples are transforming these violences through art. And I believe if art has the power to kind of make that transformation of materials, of meaning, it's a reflection of the possibilities for all of us to transform our society, to transform our world into a more peaceful and just world. And so that's kind of why art for me.
Amber, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Yeah, some of the reflections I have from Aaron, like, you know, art becomes a vessel for truth telling and a way to reflect on personal experiences and challenge the systems that have shaped them. This project was born from the desire to create space for those truths. And I wanted to explore who is making work on war, resistance, and survival. And the project, the Veteran Arts Summit, has grown into something much bigger. It's a community, a conversation, and a kind of collective voice. And, you know, I think one thing that made the curatorial process unique is our commitment to relationship building. We worked with over 50 artists, and around 35 of them were visual artists. And we met with each one individually and went over what started as like a wish list of a checklist. And we walked through with each artist, each piece, and for all three exhibitions, whether they were in that exhibition or not, and all the works in the show. And it wasn't just about where the piece fit in the gallery, it was about how the works were in conversation with one another. And this approach was slow, intentional, and community-centered. And that's what makes this project successful, and projects like this one. This kind of collaborative curating is a form of active engagement, and you know, the process of selecting, discussing, and interpreting the work becomes just as important as the final exhibition. And it's an invitation for that dialogue. It's not just display. And what I mean by that is like, it's the journey, which feels very cliche to say, but like, it's the journey is more important than just the exhibition, and the book is the documentation of the journey. And like, you know, one of my values, like curatorially, or practice, is I try to bring hosting well to the process. And I wanted artists to feel genuinely cared for. I feel like too often artists and scholars are asked to pay to play, and you know, to bring their work, their labor, their stories without support. And from the beginning, it was important to me that artists felt seen and supported. And I hope all the artists in the project felt cared for. So thank you, Miranda.
I just want to jump in there too, because I think, I'm glad, Amber, that you talked about the process, a lot of that invisible care work that you did in particular, and that, that sharing of the checklists is not conventional. It's like not how people create exhibitions usually, or how artists are invited to these like group shows, right? And we were bringing lots of disparate kinds of peoples into conversation, which was like the way that we enacted the mode of solidarity, right? And as you were saying, Aaron, like art is this frontline practice of survivance and solidarity. That's like the tool that we have in relationship to empire's violence. I think like art is also not only a record of dissent or protest, it's also this material, sensorial, imaginative intervention into those centuries of US imperial violence. Like that's one of the arguments, at least, that we're trying to make in the book's introduction, is that by seeing all of these disparate art practices in relationship to each other, we tell a different story about empire, the story that the empire does not want us to know. And so that's part of what's also happening by putting veteran art and survivor art, for lack of a better term, like the artists from the Native and Indigenous communities and South and Southwest Asian communities, like who are directly impacted by these forever wars or long wars. Like part of what the art is doing is making visible the residues of forever war violence, from indigenous survivance to diasporic insurgencies across the greater Middle East and South Asia. And so I think, all of this talk about art is reminding me that surviving the long wars, the word surviving, the way that we frame that itself, surviving, is a creative act of rebellion. And, a lot of our dreams and futures will be, crafted through these kinds of creations and creative practices.
I wanted to add a little bit to that too, which was just when I think about surviving the long wars in an indigenous Native woman perspective, is thinking through how Native people have had to, or indigenous people, at least to the continent that is North America, have been dealing with war and invasion since the time the Europeans invaded both coasts, right? And how our way of coping has been through the use of adapting our creative practices to whatever sustains the community as they are in that existence. So whether that's taking, instead of hide painting, going through and using ledger art as another way of expression. One of my good friends, Frank Walm, who is also Lakota and in Chicago, always says that Native people are alchemists, and we're able to create so much out of nothing because so much has been taken from us. And I really liked that this project was making sure to put that emphasis that this country specifically has been at war with its indigenous population since before its founding. And that template has been carried over into the invasion of other countries, and how we all kind of are complicit in that kind of system, but that art and community projects like this, which come from all different backgrounds, can help us think of new ways forward. And art can come in so many different ways. It's written, it is visual, it's performance. It's not just one thing. And I think that that's what we were able to capture so well within the book, is showing how there's different artists working through those motions to release that trauma from themselves. Okay, well, after saying that, I am going to move into the next question. So one of the most radical, or quote unquote radical, aspects of surviving the long wars is its refusal to accept the dominant narratives of war and militarism. It actively disrupts empire's storytelling by centering voices that are too often silenced or overlooked. I'm sorry. So I wanted to ask how this project challenges those narratives of war and militarism, especially American empire building, and fills a critical void in both cultural and scholarly conversations. So how does this book disrupt conventional narratives? What void does it fill with both cultural and scholarly conversations? Ronak, would you like to begin?
Sure, this is a heavy one, as we're experiencing the brunt of long war violence every day at home and abroad, from here to Palestine to Kashmir and beyond. I think one of U.S. empire, or just empires in general's most insidious acts, is making war feel inevitable and natural, and also distant and remote. And I think what we're doing in this project is radically insisting that militarism is intimate, that it structures our families, our body minds, our lands. And so the project is trying to interrupt the kind of amnesia that empire demands, which is how we are constantly, moving along in this late stage empire moment, right? I think the artists and creative people in this book make it impossible to look away. And so that's how it fills the void, because I think even in progressive and radical social movements, sometimes we replicate a sanitized story of good wars or bad wars, or like the good people and bad people in these spaces. And we're definitely challenging that logic and instead offering this messier, more embodied, more survivor-driven account that refuses the idea that war ever even really ends. And that's exactly what we're trying to do by putting the Indian Wars and the War on Terror in conversation, and not only as like echoes or to show kind of parallels or the comparative relational dimensions of these wars, but to recognize that this is one continuous project, as you said, Miranda, since the founding of the nation. And so, like, if empire demands amnesia, our project demands memory, this kind of messy, entangled, embodied memory, that disrupts the sort of linear, sanitized story with clear starts and ends of these wars, and instead traces a continuum. I think also, like one of the arguments that I tried to make in Insurgent Aesthetics that really came through our curatorial practice and actually getting a chance to curate some of the artists from that book in this project, including people like Mawish Chishti and Chitra Ganesh and Mariam Ghani and the Index of the Disappeared, was that we wanted to like surface all of these hidden intimacies of global militarized violence. It's the same group of people who are enacting catastrophic forms of pain and violence all around the world. And we here in the US, because we are siloed to think that these things are separate, sometimes don't see those connections. And so the connections of settler colonialism, of racial capitalism, of detention, deportation, of occupation, like we're making that clearer by connecting the dots through the art practice, I would say.
Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, the amnesia that you were just speaking to, Ronak, I feel like you touched on so many things I wanted to respond to or add to. But the amnesia, I feel, is so profound. Recently, I was asked last year to participate in an oral history project of the Iraq War. The University Press was working on this publication, and they were looking for, they said, a diversity of voices to speak to the history of the Iraq War and or the American War in Iraq, I should better say. And I wrote back to them and just asked them for a bit more about like who all were they including? And they talked about, well, that they were going to include uh, women veterans, that they were going to include Black veterans, that they were going to include generals and officers and also enlisted, and they were going to include journalists, and they were going to include activists too. And I asked them, are you including, any Iraqi perspectives, like any, and they're like, well, oh, we do have, there's a translator that we are going to interview, I believe is what they told me. But I feel like, I asked these questions and, just about like who gets to tell these stories and what voices are lifted up, and the idea that, the US perpetuates an illegal occupation of another country and genocide. And the individuals that perpetuate are the only ones telling the story is it's like the opposite, but it's the amnesia that you're talking about that's the norm, that's perpetuated through our culture, and that that is exactly what we're trying to resist and trying to push back and trying to shift. And I think that process, is about pushing back against the ideas, the internalized or norms of American exceptionalism, of the security state, and we rupture those things by bringing these voices together. And I think a lot about Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam speech and how he calls for a radical revolution of values. And what does it mean to reorientate our values to actually be in solidarity with people around the world impacted by these systems of violence. And I feel art is a way to create space to do that and to actualize those forms of solidarity. And I feel like it's important within this framework to kind of just, in talking about empire, I feel like it's really important to note, like, just the veteran identity is really fraught. It's a really complicated space. And yeah, but like if we're working to the abolition of militarism, the abolition of empire, the abolition of colonialism, then there is something to say about the veteran identity and the role. Veterans embody so many of the contradictions of those systems of violence. And it's true that the narrative of veteran identity has been so blatantly co-opted by white supremacy, by nationalism, by all these kind of militarized norms. But is that what truly reflects who veterans are? Veterans often come from the same communities that are targeted by U.S. colonialism, by U.S. empire, by U.S. militarism. So the same communities that are targeted are the same communities that are recruited into those systems of violence. And so what does it mean to like kind of push back against these binaries and to see the intersections? And it's important to note that the military itself is a class-based system, and I feel like if we see it as that, it becomes really clear, like, what it means to build intersections of solidarity, like who are being targeted and impacted by war, by violence. And it's true, like if we walk away from, if there's like if we cede the veteran identity to reactionary forces, even marginalized communities, even BIPOC veterans are going to be drawn into reactionary politics. And I feel like that's so much of like what under neoliberalism, under this kind of like this turn to fascism we're in, like that, there's like still so little space where we're creating to look at a different history. Yet it's worth noting that, part of why Martin Luther King got involved with protesting being involved with the anti-war movement was because a disproportionate number of Black and Brown service members that were getting killed in Vietnam. It's also true that the disproportionate number of BIPOC service members that have other than honorable discharges is something to note, that there is this massive history of GI resistance and refusal to comply with the American wars in Vietnam, with the American global war on terror. And that history, I think, is something that it's really important to kind of lift up, that history of veterans' involvement in civil rights and the Black Panthers and the American Indian movement and Vietnam veterans against the war, because it creates this other narrative. It creates an opportunity to have that radical reorientation and roots in a different lineage. I feel like, and there's a lot of artists in that lineage. And I feel like that's, that turn is not just for veterans then, but it might be an opportunity to show, like, even, if that opportunity exists for veterans, it's an opportunity for this entire culture to have a turn, to have a radical reorientation. So I don't know, I hope that lays in the relationship to empire.
It does. Yeah, sorry. My screen disappeared on me. It does, Erin. Thank you so much. Does anyone, Therese, Amber, have anything that you would like to add to this point before moving on?
I'll just say a real quick thing. When Erin was talking, I remembered one of the things I loved so much about the working on this project was attending one of Erin's classes where there were veterans from the UIC campus looking at art and being invited to talk about and engage with art, visual art, but also with poetry. And the people who were having those conversations with them about that art were also veterans. And it was a really powerful moment. And I remember that one of the young veterans who was at that session said, like, this is the first time that I've been invited to talk about art. I haven't really looked at art. And hearing that, I felt like, we're opening up a space for a rich engagement that is the kind of engagement all of us should be able to have with art. But getting back to the point that Erin made about class being a structure that governs all this, who is prevented from engaging with the most wonderful stuff of that humankind has created, in a sense, and yet is invited into some of the worst that humankind has created. So we need to have more of these opportunities to have the arts, have culture, have humanities-based discussions, as Ronak pointed out earlier. And it's something I'm really proud of that this project was able to do.
Thank you. And I feel like that's a really great way to transition into talking about how collaboration on this scale between all of us is powerful, but it's not without its tensions and contradictions. There's different identities here, obviously institutional context and power dynamics, which inevitably shape the process in some ways. Not with us so much, but I think when it comes to thinking about the communities that we engage in. So let's explore how these challenges were navigated and what they revealed about collective art making and art in resistance to empire. So what challenges or tensions emerged during this process, and how did the different identities, context, and power dynamics shape this work? Therese, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll kick us off on this one, but I'm sure other people might have something to say about all these things too. So I talked about who is on campus a little bit at UIC. We have a really vibrant veteran student population there. We're also a minority serving campus. We're, right in the center of Chicago. So we're kind of a rich and intersectional space. A lot of people are there with a lot of different ideas and life perspectives. But so it did come up, though, that students on campus had some thoughts about our project, which I know everybody will remember because the organizing collective received a letter from a group of students, not all of whom were directly involved with the project, but they were part of the Museum and Exhibition Studies program, and they heard about the project. And as they wrote, I have to read a little bit of it, they wrote to us as self-described deeply bothered students. And they said they thought that justice should be pro-BLM or pro-Black Lives Matter, defunding and demilitarizing the police, and anti-establishment. Yet we are pro-veterans, they said. So this kind of gets to some of the things that Erin just addressed. And they asked if we would sit down with ICE, would we sit down with police officers? And they had a number of other really challenging questions for us that provoked all kinds of discussion among our collective. I mean, we had to talk through this letter many times and ultimately talked with the students. It was good, really challenging, but very good discussions that we had. And that gives you a sense, I think, of just kind of the complexities and also of work, what it's like to be working with students. I mean, it's part of that educational process. I'm really proud and happy also that the students felt comfortable to pose those questions to us and that we were able to take those questions on and reflect on them. The one other moment that I wanted to just bring up, and others might have something to say about it, was our discussions about COVID-19 safety protocols and what we were going to put in place at the triennial. Were we going to require masks? Were we going to gently suggest masks? Were we just going to have some masks on a table? Were we going to, how are we going to frame it? And just how we were going to frame that. And we came to a conclusion, took a lot of discussions, and ultimately one person who we were all excited about, an artist who was going to be performing, decided to withdraw. Partly, I think, based on the decision that we made about how we were going to frame the wearing of masks and just safety protocols in general. So I don't know what else I have to say about that, except that I feel like it gave us many opportunities to, it could have given us an opportunity to step back and be, petrified and not want to deal with it. But I think we really enacted solidarity. We grappled with the complexities, and I think it it's a mode that we use that was all throughout this project, all throughout the triennial and all the work that we did together. So I'll turn it over who wants to take those on next.
Well, you definitely kicked us off, Therese. And I thank you for reminding me things that had been surfaced. Maybe was having my own amnesia moment in relationship to some of those challenges. But it's true that, all honest coalition work comes with tensions. And I'm so proud of the way that we struggled in community with each other to come to consensus around a whole host of things, as you mentioned. And, as you talked about, with the Muse students, like, I'm so grateful for the badass, radical, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, queer, anti-authoritarian student population at UIC. It's like one of the best parts of my career in life is to be able to teach students who bring that sort of politics. And with that, they were reflecting and articulating something that I feel like maybe even some of our colleagues or institutional partners didn't have the guts or chutzpah to say, but were thinking themselves when it came with, and it was like, why are these folks who write and work around U.S. empire or Native studies and et cetera partnering with a group of veterans? Like, what's that about? And not knowing necessarily the history of the emerging veteran art movement or the kind of anti-war abolitionist oriented movement work that Aaron and Amber and other people have been involved with, and folks who are on this call. And I had to really think for myself too, like, what does it mean to have, created scholarship looking at the survivors who have been impacted by forever wars and long wars, and then want to be in conversation with war workers, people who have these complicated relationships. As Aaron, you said, veterans have complex identities, people who are complicit in systems of violence, but also resisting them, people who come from the very communities that have been devastated by racial capitalism and empire, who then are the front lines in service of empire, right? I mean, that's not only true on the American side, that's also true on the side of the global South. And part of what we explored in the triennial was the way that Afghan Americans and Afghans themselves have been participating in war efforts as military translators in sites of detention and deportation and interrogation. And we looked at a lot of art projects that were engaging those questions of how people from the global South and diasporic people are also enmeshed in these questions of power and refusal and rebellion. So I think we navigated those institutional constraints, those uneven power dynamics. Like, there's power dynamics even in this group amongst ourselves around a whole host of questions and a whole range of categories of difference, including like tenured faculty versus like someone who's working as a clinical person or as an adjunct, right? And like those dynamics, and we're also spread all across North America, and so our experiences of COVID-19 pandemic are very different in Chicago than they were in Southern California or in Tennessee or South Dakota and so forth. So I think that we took those differences really seriously, and none of this was a failure. It was all kind of actually the terrain of serious rebellion, was to think through these stakes and lay them out on the table. And then the last thing I'll just say is, like, I think we are all committed to that kind of abolitionist principles of accountability and transformation. Aaron, you often say, like, nobody is the worst thing that they've ever done. And like, what does it mean to partner with people who've dedicated their entire adult lives to a transformative relationship to the violence that they enacted? That's really, and what we learn from abolition feminism, right, is that everyone can experience harm and everyone can perpetrate harm. And I think what shook me about this project was folks that I expected to really be on board, comrades in the movement, in other spaces, people on campus, who didn't quite like work on the Zoom calls, not really seeing the kinds of transformative things that we were talking about, who sort of stayed on the sidelines and decided not to participate or collaborate for whatever reason, right? And so I'm just reflecting on those things.
I'd like to just kind of speak a little bit to the tension of the veteran identity, which is a really uncomfortable subject, because American veterans occupy a unique space of access. and one that comes with the responsibility to open doors to broader conversations. Veterans are often like protected in ways that others aren't. And I've noticed people, even those who disagree with me politically, will often like pause or listen simply because of that, like because I'm a veteran or that status. So for some audience members, it comes with a kind of status. For others, it comes with demerits. And I see some of this access as a way to bring difficult conversations to spaces that might otherwise be closed off. And in a time where people are, scared of losing fundamental forms of stability, it's really crucial to use every possible avenue to build connection. This is why I believe veterans need to be a part of abolition work, because we can help shift who is listening and also whose voices are being uplifted. And so, I invite other veterans hearing this or, tuning in to, think about what their responsibility is as a veteran to open doors for broader conversations. Thanks.
Just adding a few quick thoughts. One, you said something. You said it wasn't a failure, and I wanted to acknowledge that when we had those meetings with every artist, we talked about how fraught this whole thing is, how it was a really problematic project, and that there was real power differentials involved, and still there was something else that was important. There was this potential for like a new relationship, a new position. And I also wanted to lift up what you were saying, Ronak, about abolitionist feminist ideas and how much I've learned from getting to work at Stateville Prison over the last decade, and the scholars and artists there, and what they've taught me and so many of us and abolitionists that have worked in that space, just about this question of like, about this binary of victim and perpetrator, and what does it mean to break those things down, and the relationship that many people that perpetuate harm are also have been harmed. And that there's this abolitionist saying, hurt people hurt people. And what does it mean to reorientate to healing and restorative justice, transformative justice? And it's messy. Like, I think and I feel like I hope that's one thing that when we, especially working, I was so humbled by the Iraqi artists that participated in this Hana Malahol, like international powerhouse. I just am humbled by her work, and just being able to talk with her that that this isn't a perfect project. Yeah, with Bassem and Ali and all the artists, that was just like being able to talk about these tensions. And so I think the fact that we just sat, a lot of times, we didn't try and say we had the answers for all these contradictions, but just tried to say, like, we're trying to create space actually to deal with them, to sit with them, to work with them, to push against them. And that's hopefully what this project is creating, is an opportunity to engage with those tensions.
Can I just piggyback really quickly to say that, like, that's like the experimental ethos of our project from the inception to now. We're still experimenting. We're still trying things out without, necessarily like having it all figured out. And like, that's like, part of what's bold and interesting and innovative about the book and about the project more generally. But also it's like, there's so little space to experiment, because it feels like unless you've figured it out and you've aligned all of the everything neatly, a lot of folks don't get on board from a funding perspective, from a legibility perspective. I'm also just reflecting on like the critical reception to the triennial and when it was written about, and how it showed up, and we all reflected at some point a year and a half ago that summit happened in March of 2023. It was the 20-year anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and then we went home after this like incredibly moving, healing, creative, beautiful, tear-stricken experience, 4-day experience of the summit. And then there were all of these like 15-second news stories about the US invasion in Iraq on the news, including on like PBS NewsHour, that were so about the like mainstream perspective about American veterans reflecting on their combat experience 20 years later. And we had just had this like alternative universe of creative experiences together, and the disconnect and the dissonance between the thing that we were doing and how legible or illegible it is in the world. I'm just reflecting on that because I think, as somebody who's committed to insurgent aesthetic practices, there's always going to be this feeling of dissonance where you're doing something collaboratively, you're pouring all your energy into it, and yet people don't know what to do with it. And so they don't know, and then they can only sort of, their recourse is to like a kind of liberal humanitarian recuperative narrative of what you've done, because it's the only way to like peg and make sense of the thing that we were doing, right? So I'm just reflecting on that.
Really quickly, just as a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A so that way we can address them as they come up. Before, I wanted just to also say, I think what made me really excited about joining this process were the contradictions of this process. Because having worked in so many institutions where they're afraid to engage in those complexities, where they're afraid to engage in the conversations that go into those kinds of complexities, is very disheartening, because that's not how anything actually gets done or changes if we're not willing to be brave and actually like address what is happening in the world. And the different contradictions that come up in all of our work. And a big part of what I think we've done with this work has been, if you don't like something about it, then respond to it. Like, that's what we are also hoping for, like people to respond to what we're doing in a way that makes them feel seen and heard as well, because we know we're not the be all end all to these topics, right? But we knew that we had to get this topic started. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next final segment of what we're talking about. It's let's look forward. How can the lessons from this work guide us in imagining abolitionist futures? What solidarities are necessary to make that future happen? And what does creative rebellion mean in our current moment of polycrisis? So I have anyone really, but if Therese would like to start, that'd be great.
I will start it, but I think maybe others have something better to say. I mostly wanted to share that quote that I just stuck in the, the chat from James Baldwin. I was reading something recently and the quote was there and I thought it was beautiful. And it reminded me, well, number one, that James Baldwin knew everything and was always right. And then secondly, that artists, which I think is a role that everyone has capacity to inhabit. One of the things, this is my anti-authoritarian part, I hate the limitation of the way that term or that category is framed. Sometimes that only a few people, the special people, the people who are, selling art or something, get to call themselves an artist or get to just inhabit the beingness of making art and thinking in those artful ways. So that's something that everybody can and should be able to do, and more of us should be able to do it, should be doing it, because it is a way that we can help each other see in new and fresh ways what is before us. We are always going to have to resist something, and we may not always see a way forward, but someone out there is going to be able to see that way. And if through art, I think they can put that out there and help us to see it, just in the way that when I felt isolated in my anti-Iraq war protesting many years ago, and I saw the poster that Aaron had made and flyered, literally every aspect of the street I was on. Probably it was the route of the protest march. It gave me the message that I wasn't alone in those feelings, that there were others out there, and in fact, not just any others, but veteran others who were doing that work. And it's an excellent feeling to know that we are together in this struggle. Again, getting back to the solidarity and that we need all of us to do this work, part of it, which is so important when we're dealing with the issues that we've always been dealing with and we are going to continue to be dealing with for quite some time. I'll just leave it there, whoever wants to jump.
Who's next?
I can speak on that a little bit. Creative rebellion is more necessary than ever right now. Art, especially visual storytelling, is a powerful tool for connection. And, it invites people to engage with difficult topics and offers a window into new perspectives that Therese mentioned. And I just want to take a moment to list some of the veteran art fellows associated with this project. Natasha Erskine, Gina Herrera, Monty Little, Eric Perez, Gerald Sheffield, and Anthony Torres. Thinking about the poly crisis, art is under attack right now. And we can see cuts in funding, censorship, and increased pressure to make more art more apolitical. And the reason why it's under attack is because it's so powerful. It has the power to shift culture, spark change, and give voice to truth. And this project in all its forms is not just an archive or an exhibition, it's a living act of resistance. So, looking forward, this project imagine and enacts connections between artists, communities, and activists who may have historically not been aligned. And it's about creating those lasting connections that transcend individual struggles. And, we're planning another summit next year. So that's another, we're building towards the future of continuing to work with these artists and communities that have been a part of the projects the last 2 triennials as well. Anyone else?
I'll jump in and just say, yeah, when it comes to the future, I think it's those, I just really, it's the people, so many of the people on the call, so many of the people that are here, so many people that have been a part of the project and how we continue to build relationships with each other. I also feel like it's a part of learning and being humble. How do we create space to learn together? How do we create space to be wrong? How do we create space to acknowledge harms and also to acknowledge what's possible together? I worked last year on an exhibition with people at Stateville Prison called Humans of Life Row. It's more beautiful, more terrible, based on a James Baldwin quote, Humans of Life Row. And it was organized all by these artists that are in Life Row here in Illinois. And, they started their exhibition with a statement on harm, art, and healing. And it was just a way to acknowledge the cycles and the spaces of harm. And I've just been so inspired by, by that push against shame, being a part of an occupation, being an oppressor, it's filled me with guilt and shame. And I also know that from working with survivors of torture, survivors of violence, that also fills people with shame. And I've been so inspired by the Chicago police torture survivors that have spoken out through the shame. And to me, that creation of voice is the creative rebellion we're talking about. To me, that is a profoundly creative process to take that violence, that trauma, that shame, and turn it into resistance, into a force that can change our society. And, I think that in the broadest spectrum, especially right now in this moment, I want to just give love and a shout out to everybody on this, imagining that idea of creative rebellion in the broadest way, from, I just think about, there used to be this thing called search and avoid, which was something that service members deployed to Iraq, instead of going on their patrols, would go pull up underneath the bypass and not go on their patrols. And it was about avoiding their missions. I think about people just not contributing to the harm, all the way to, the creativity of a specialist walking into a data center and downloading all these, military communications, including the collateral murder video, sharing that information with journalists, the creativity to do that, the creativity of Chelsea Manning to do that work, I feel is like the spectrum of that is like what is needed. The creativity of all of the, all the people that, yeah, just continue to find ways to create despite.
That's hard to follow up. So, Miranda, do you want to go or should I? I I keep coming back to the concept of survival and when I'm thinking about rebellion, because what does it mean to survive when the structures meant to sustain life seemingly are increasingly designed to extinguish it? It feels like every structure is like invested in, annihilating difference, annihilating the vulnerable, and annihilating the stranger in this moment. And so when we say surviving the long wars, I'm thinking not just about enduring this violence, right? I'm talking about, as you just said, Aaron, like refusing the conditions, like being a refusenik, right? Which we talked about a lot over the course of this project, but also refusing the conditions of premature death that empire has set for us. Like we're talking about making our survival a collective, creative, insurgent practice. And so I think creative rebellion today is about holding on to radical imagination when every system is telling us to give up and to like bury our head in the sand. And there's so much repression, especially in this moment. And I think about all the young people on college campuses who are enacting encampments again this year after everything that has happened in the past year. And the kind of steadfastness and samud, the Palestinian concept of samud that takes. So creative rebellion is also about refusing the easy spectacle of despair. There's a lot of despair in the air, and it's easy to kind of get swept up in that. But instead, it's about insisting amidst all of this planetary violence and state abandonment and climate catastrophe and recognition that the US military is the largest perpetrator of global violence in the world and a project of mass disablement. And as somebody, Rocio, is saying in the Q&A, like the story about wanting to hear more about immigrant veteran artists' stories, specifically those who've been deported. It's also a deportation regime. And, it's a recognition that the US military is enacting all this violence, and yet we're still here, we're still dreaming, we're still building messy, beautiful alternatives, and that's really powerful, right? Is like it's like recognizing that, and also being wide-eyed and clear-eyed about the fact that the long wars, the forever wars, whatever we want to call them, they're not behind us. They're not just history. They are ongoing. They are morphing. They are embedding themselves in borders and prisons and drones and algorithmic forms of misery. And in the face of all of that, surviving the long wars is trying to insist that there is world-making power to art and to the kind of relational care that we are all practicing here today.
I mean, I have a long answer for this too, but I don't want to take up too much time before moving into I see we have a few questions or two questions at least. But for me, I wanted to say that this time that we're in right now not only requires us to reimagine the spaces that we're in and maybe imagine a future, because in my way of thinking, the way that I've been raised was to always think about 5 generations ahead. So when I do my work, when I live my life, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing now and the immediate successes that come from that. I'm thinking about what am I doing to set up for the next generation. And I feel like we kind of have lost that in this country, is thinking through like how we're supposed to be taking care of that next generation instead of just like immediate success. Overconsumption, the rise of Amazon Prime, like all of these things which have made it easy to access resources but not access community care, which is done deliberately in many ways, right? But for me, I think a lot of times we get complacent in the world that we're in, because life isn't horrible for a lot of us, especially those who are in these spaces of higher education. But I think that we all need to take like brave actions, recognizing that sometimes those actions do have consequences, right? Do have means that people may not be able to get jobs, or maybe not able to sustain their livelihood in the way that they want to, because they are speaking out against these things. Especially having students, right, who are expelled for protesting, which is their right, but now they have to live with those consequences for the rest of their lives. So understanding and coming to terms with that it's okay to be brave and to take a risk, but that it's also something you have to come to terms with. And it's not because I don't think the world should be created this way, but it makes you feel good and it helps you think of the next generation. So I encourage all of you and to encourage your partners or your colleagues, especially, to think through like, how can you help the next generation of people instead of just thinking about right now, because we're not helping anyone really right now, in my opinion. We're helping each other in this collective moment with each other here on this call, but in the long term, it takes a lot more. So, all right, well, I guess right now I'll end there with that. And I just want to ask, I see there's a few questions. I'm trying to open them on mine. Oh, hi, Rocio. Hi. Are there any, did we answer that one? Oh, Mark, okay.
Why don't you read out both questions, the answered one and the open one, and then we'll continue to invite folks if they want to participate in the Q&A.
Okay, great. So Rocia Villanueva made a statement that said, this is a powerful, humbling, and inspiring project. I myself had an emotional breakdown in the summit that is helping me through my own healing. I would love to see the integration of immigrant veterans, artists' stories, specifically those who have been deported. And the other question was, it's not a question, but was from Mark Zimmerman, which is, Aaron, thank you for stating the obvious early on, which is true by definition, that creativity is not destructive. The clarity of your statement rang like a crystal bell and helps make sense of an important aspect of the creative process. And Ronak responded, amen. Is there anything that you all would love to add on to those or expand upon? Or does anyone have any questions that they would love to drop in? Even the co-editors, is there any other questions you would like us to address?
I did see someone raise their hand earlier, so if you want to drop it in, that'd be great. And to Rocio's point, I think it's extremely important that we connect with the veteran community that's been deported, and really to all the individuals that are being targeted right now around this current regime. The ICE and like all of these kind of militarization of our communities is built on just following up from the global war on terror and the expansion, the formation of ICE, and just so like how do we, and Ronak talked earlier about the index of the disappeared and how they were tracing out these connections between these forms of violence. And I feel like, yeah, creating space to hear from individuals that have survived and are speaking out about it would be great. I know that there's a number of veteran projects that have been specifically working around that, and that there's a veteran house in Mexico of all deported veterans, which is, what to say about that. But it's a reflection of, all these contradictions we were talking about earlier.
I would just want to add that, okay, there's a question here, I think from Sandra. In the work that you're doing, how do you look at the opportunities with creating in the context of a futurist, imagining the future kind of way? Well, in fact, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I did want to say, like, this is future oriented, and that this is like not just a record of like what we did and this collaboration over several years and the triennial, although it has so much beautiful art, as you know, there's more than 250 images throughout this book project, and all proceeds go back to Bridge Books. And so we want everybody on the call and everyone listening to tell your friends and your comrades and your institutional partners to buy copies of this book and share it and teach it. But I guess the question I want to pose to folks on this call is like, how are we going to make use of this project? Like, how is this going to be a model or a template for the kinds of creative curatorial collaborations that other people want to take on in their spaces and their communities? That's kind of how we wrote you know, that's how we conceptualized this book project, was to think of it as a documentary process, but also as a sort of field guide, perhaps, for other modes of creative refusal. And so I hope everybody will take it with that spirit, and will think alongside all of us, and invite the folks on this call and all the veteran artists who are in the room to participate in these spaces. I think the other thing that came up a lot in our conversations was the recognition that veteran art is very rarely written about, and that there's very little scholarship that like engages critically with the work that, you know, the really beautiful and sophisticated creative work that people are producing now. And so one of the goals was to create that evidence and create that scholarship. And I hope that that's been useful, and that people will teach it in their spaces, whether that's in your reading groups or in your classrooms. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, is there anyone, would you like to discuss what the future looks like for this project, Erin? I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but Carlos is wondering maybe a documentary or interviews for YouTube. There's still so much to do, and they are very supportive of us.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. So Amber mentioned earlier, we're working on the next triennial and summit, you know, trying to deepen these questions, especially around abolition, especially, you know, in navigating this ever quickly morphing moment. And so, you know, that's, we're working on that, and, you know, we're trying to build our kind of initial list of artists right now. We have secured commitments from institutions. The Hyde Park Art Center will be hosting the Elmhurst Art Museum, the Walls Turn Sideways, which is a really powerful community space on the west side of Chicago, organized by people that have survived incarceration. And then also the Chicago Cultural Center. So, you know, we're getting there, and they'll be in the fall of 2026. And you know, in November, the weekend before Veterans Day, will be the summit. We're going to, of course, invite all of you out for that. You know, but just to circle around to what Ronak said, is this point about scholarship and criticality. And I really, you know, I mean, you know, in a selfish sense, like as an artist, I want to be a better artist. I want to be a part of a conversation of brilliant and great artists. And, you know, I feel really bluntly like, you know, I did a residency in Beirut in 2013 at a place called Ashkal Alwan, amazing space. And, you know, the idea of a veteran artist in this space is like, I am only a colonizer. And that was made clear to me. And, you know, what does that mean to acknowledge that role? And, you know, there's ways that maybe that means that I should not create art anymore. And I've definitely been a part of conversations that have been around that space. And I've also been a part of these conversations where there's an opportunity for that radical reimagination. And I guess I just think that like this critical scholarship, you know, it's like the critical scholarship that's happening around so much art is not happened around the veteran art community, and often is like these very anecdotal stories about, you know, how wonderful it is that veterans made art, or how it's about their healing. And I'll just say one other note about that frame about veteran healing, and is that, you know, the trauma-informed art historically has often been utilized to socialize traumas, not to individualize them. Yet within the veteran community, they're always individualized. And so I think a big part of this project is trying to fight that narrative, trying to push back the narrative and socialize these social problems. War is a social problem. Militarism is a social problem. And our art is speaking to that, offering opportunities for people to engage with that And yet I know our art can, will never do what it needs to do unless it's in dialogue with all the other people that are asking questions about this clear social political problem.
Yes, and I agree that for me, what come up before we conclude is right now everything is being categorized. I mean, not right now, but in the past, 10 years, maybe everything's getting categorized as being quote unquote woke, as being quote unquote, a DEI type of initiative. And what has happened in the past 100 days of the second Trump presidency has really rolled back efforts that a lot of us here on this call have done to ensure that the arts are successful in the ways that they are, and have also created narratives that are based in truth that are now being cast as doubtful. And I really hope that through our work, we can continue, and I think we will, but continue telling the truth in a country that is demanding that we remain silent and also neutral at this point. And that we keep standing up to the government in the ways that we want to be honored. I think a lot of times the government acts like we are all just out here like Teresa being anarchist, and sure, but also they're not hearing what we're actually saying about what it means to live in this country in the real time, and they're doing that on purpose. And I think that our work speaks in direct contradiction to what they want us to be and who they want us to be. And oftentimes it makes me sad, and I think it makes us afraid, and because the complex surveillance industry is huge, but also it's showing that there are people who are committed to this work, who are committed to telling these stories. And we have to be committed to supporting one another in that journey as much as possible. Whether it's good, bad, I think a lot of us here are always willing to have a conversation about what makes this project work, what it doesn't make work, and inviting people to open it up even more. Like if there's something that's wrong, open up, like let's talk about it. So this is great. It's 12:30, well, at least in California. So I just wanted to say one more time, thank you to everyone who has joined us here in this conversation today, to the speakers, to the partners, to everyone involved. You can purchase the book via Bridge Books, and the link is in the chat, and I'm pretty sure someone will drop it in again just in case right now. There's also our Surviving the Long Wars website, which has the links to the triennial events, the different exhibitions that took place, and future events. You can also sign up to be a part of our mailing system, so you can get different updates about events and the progress that is being made. And again, we would love to just see any celebratory messages you want to put in the chat about how great this has been. I know for me, this has been such a full circle moment to have gone through what I've gone through on an individual basis, and always have this group as a source of betterment and community. So thank you, everyone. And if there's anything else anyone would like to say, then I will wrap this up. Thank you, Rocio. Thank you, everyone.
I just want to say thanks to all the artists. You all are amazing. It's all the scholars, everyone that contributed. It's been such an honor to get to work with everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Lots of love to you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you later.